YouTube! Welcome to Fred's Full Throttle. This week we have a bit of a departure from the Corvette news and coverage that I usually share, and we're doing something equally interesting if a bit different. This is the 15-year, 186,000 mile review of the second generation Toyota Tacoma. Today I'm doing the ultimate owner's review and long-term reliability test for the 2007 Toyota Tacoma. I will be covering driving dynamics, comfort, utility, off-road ability, reliability, weird and interesting things, and then summarizing and providing my final thoughts. There is a fair bit to cover here over this 5,514-day test, so let's jump right in. Prior to starting this test, I drove a 2000 Toyota RAV4L with a 5-speed manual. Having had good luck with reliability and overall really enjoying the car, I decided that my next vehicle would also be a Toyota. Having found that I liked the smaller size of the RAV4, but wishing it had a bit more storage, I decided to go for a mid-size truck rather than full-size, and that brought me to the Tacoma. Years before, back in 2004, while I was still in college, I had gone to a Toyota dealer for service and was in love with the bright Speedway blue that was offered on the Tacoma. I snapped a picture. Then fast forward 3 years, and miraculously, Toyota still offered that color. So I just needed to pull the trigger and start the test. I traded in my RAV4 with 142,082 miles accumulated over about 7 years of driving. So to start this test, on July 27th, 2007, I purchased the truck so we could start this review. The truck itself is a 2007 Toyota Tacoma TRD Sport Access Cab in Speedway Blue. Comes with a 4-liter V6 making 236 horsepower and 266 pound-feet of torque, mated to a 5-speed automatic transmission. It offers 4-wheel drive in high and low ranges, and some of the features include a 400-watt AC power inverter in the bed, 17-inch alloy wheels that are wider than the standard wheels at 265 65R17s, a towing package with beefed-up cooling for the engine and the transmission, and color-matched bodywork with an accent hood scoop, though it's not really functional. I paid $29,722 for the truck back in 2007, and it was delivered to me with 190 miles on the clock as it had been driven from Vermont to Nashua, New Hampshire, where I was living at the time. Now, a few stats before we begin. Over the course of ownership with this truck, it has driven in 9 different states, basically all of New England and a few adjoining states. It's driven in temperatures as high as 110 degrees Fahrenheit and as cold as -36. It's gone through 4 sets of tires, and each time I bought the original OEM tires, which are Dunlop Grand Treks. It's had 2 full windshield replacements. It's had 36 oil changes, changed every 5,000 miles. It's driven through snow up to the bottom of the grille, covering the fog lights. It's carried up to 3 motorcycles in the back simultaneously. You can fit 3 dirt bikes if you put one in backwards. It's ridden across a ferry once on Lake Champlain. It's towed 3 stuck vehicles to safety, including a Ford Expedition, a Jeep Commander, and a Ford Ranger. And most importantly, it never in 15 years stranded me anywhere. So let's get into the driving dynamics. Driving dynamics in a pickup truck are always a balance and a trade-off between what the truck is designed to do and what the truck is currently doing. A truck that's designed to haul heavy loads and tow enormous trailers needs to have a beefed-up drivetrain, cooling, and suspension. However, the trade-off for this is that the truck frequently operates when it's doing none of those things, and it still needs to be manageable and comfortable. In its medium size, the Tacoma finds itself with a great balance between handling more nimbly and car-like and the rigid, all-utility feel of larger full-size trucks. The increased suspension of the TRD Sport, which does come with special shocks, provides solid damping, not just for any paved road, but also it's at home on bumpy and washboarded dirt roads at reasonable speeds. The steering communicates what's happening back to the driver pretty well, considering the size and weight of the tires and wheels, likely due in part to the hydraulic steering system. This comes into play especially well when the truck is driving off-road, which is something we'll cover in a little bit. The brakes are solid, although somewhat vague in feel, requiring significant travel to engage the ABS. That said, with all the loads, trailers, and heavy things I've hauled in the truck, the brakes are completely reliable and capable of hauling the truck down from speed quickly without drama every time. Traction is decent in normal driving conditions, and you can floor the truck at any time, and after a brief hesitation for it to find the right gear, the truck will accelerate briskly and without drama, despite being relatively low on power from that V6. It has more than enough power to pass on the highway when towing and feels confident and planted. One area of note about the traction is that in slippery conditions, especially ice and snow, you need to be very smooth with power delivery. One of the great features of the Tacoma is that it has a composite bed. It saves hundreds of pounds of weight versus a stamped steel or aluminum bed. However, this results in a significant frontward weight bias because the back is so light. This means that even under moderate acceleration on ice or snow, you can get the back tires to lose traction and spin freely. Now, I found there are two solutions to this which can be used independently or in tandem. The easier solution is to engage four-wheel drive. Since you generally shouldn't be driving very fast when the roads are icy or snowy, four-wheel drive uses the more weighted front tires to help pull the truck along. Alternatively, several bags of sand, putting them in the back of the bed just ahead of the tailgate, will add some much needed weight to make those rear tires grip more easily. The one downside here is that you obviously are knocking a few miles off of your fuel economy. So for most of my tests, I used the first approach. However, I did try both and had solid results with both of them. All in all, the Tacoma is more nimble than a full-size truck and can tow and carry anywhere between 2/3 and 3/4 of what a full-size truck can, and exhibits smooth, assured driving characteristics. While not the most powerful truck in the segment, it was easily able to succeed at every test I threw at it. Up next, let's talk through the comfort of the Toyota Tacoma. Being up front, people generally aren't buying pickup trucks for comfort first and foremost, especially back in 2007. However, there's nothing that says you can't have a comfortable truck in addition to all the capabilities it offers. The Tacoma is reasonably comfortable, and I found that I was able to drive for hours at a time without getting a sore back or needing to stretch. The seats are fairly standard fair cloth seats with manual adjustment forward and backward, as well as a tilt backrest, and the driver's seat does offer a manually adjustable lumbar support. A common complaint you hear in most of the reviews of the Tacoma is that the seating position is awkward or shallow, as they put it. Reviewers frequently cite the relatively low seat-to-floor positioning as a problem. What they mean is that the seat is low in relation to the floor. This means that your legs extend out in front of you a little bit more than they would on a full-size truck, and that your overall seating position is a little bit less upright in regard to your legs. In the Tacoma, the seat is roughly 10 to 12 inches off the floor. This helps with the overall ground clearance of the Tacoma. By having the floor of the truck slightly higher compared to its rivals, it allows Toyota to tuck kind of all that undercarriage gear up a little bit higher, decreasing the risk of anything scraping as you're going off-road. Now on to that criticism. It's largely, if not completely, perception. The RAV4, the CR-V, and other crossovers have a similar distance from the seat to the floor of the vehicle. Also remember that until crossovers and SUVs took over, most people owned cars, which actually feature a much shorter distance from the seat to the floor. My guess is that most reviewers have a mental image of what they expect the inside of a vehicle to be like, and that many have probably experienced full-size trucks and are drawing comparisons from there, even if it's not consciously. This could be an issue if you have limited flexibility, but at 6'4" myself, I've never had any problem or discomfort from the seating position, nor has my wife, who's 5'10". For a little validation of this, take the center wheel of a vehicle and draw a line from the front wheel to the back wheel. Now look at how high the floor of the vehicle is above that line. If you compare the Tacoma to something like an F-150 or Silverado, you'll probably see that there are about 2 to 3 inches of additional height in the cab in these full-size trucks versus the Tacoma. This isn't good or bad, it's just different. Some reviewers make quite a big deal about this, so I would suggest keeping it in mind, but I never found it to be a problem, and honestly, until I watched reviews for this Tacoma recently, I hadn't even realized this was a thing. Now earlier I mentioned the suspension and the design of the vehicle needing to be able to carry heavy cargo and haul large trailers. Well, how does that translate to ride quality? Well, I'm pleased to share that throughout the 186,000 miles that I've driven in this truck, that I've found it to be comfortable and compliant. Having longer travel suspension is nice on beat-up pavement like we have in New England and Boston, and while I would say that the ride is on the firmer side, it's far from harsh or chattery. You can notice a significantly smoother ride though if you put a few hundred pounds of gear in the back, or a motorcycle, or two. But it strikes me that Toyota had to balance the ride with the truck being empty with being strong enough to support a decent payload and trailer capacity. Lastly, I'll offer this. Until my wife Rachel and I met, she hadn't been spending much time riding in pickup trucks. Well, we've now gone on several long trips, spending 2, 3, 4 hours without stopping or taking a break in the Tacoma. Never have either of us felt that the truck isn't comfortable enough to put some serious miles on it, and she's come away pretty impressed. It's not as comfortable as her XC60, but for the capability it offers, combined with a reasonable all-day comfort, I think it's pretty great. Now there are a few downsides in the comfort area that I'd like to cover. First, the back seats are tiny. And I mean, like, you don't want to put anyone back there unless you absolutely have to, especially if they're an adult. I've carried one adult in the back of the Access cab for 3 hours before, out to Cape Cod, and let's just say, she wasn't thrilled with the experience. Sorry, Angie. The seats do flip forward to a flat cargo area, and this is pretty much how I've used them all the time since buying the truck, and that's been great for putting luggage or for my dog to sit. The other thing is that since the access cab isn't particularly deep, it means that the passenger really can't recline too far on a trip if they want to sleep, especially if you've put gear behind that seat. Certainly not if you have a passenger, and if you have gear, you're going to need to either pack creatively or put it in the bed of the truck so that there's room to recline. It's never been a huge issue, but it has been worth noting. Also, the Taco has none of the niceties that newer cars have. No heated and cooled seats, no adjustable wings on the seats or electric controls, no multi-zone automatic climate control, no sunroof. It's a fairly bare-bones experience, but it's a very consistent experience. Maybe not the lap of luxury, but it's certainly not a bad place to be for long periods of time. Lastly, I will say that I wished I had gotten the four-door instead of the access cab. At the time, I wrestled with the decision, but I really couldn't afford the extra $4,000 to get the four-door. I'm sure I probably could have somehow made it work, but I decided I wanted to stick to my budget, and that the few times a year I try to carry 4 adults, it didn't really warrant spending that much extra money, so I went without. Alright, on to one of the stronger suits of the Tacoma, and that's utility. With a payload capacity of 1,440 pounds and a tow rating of 6,500 pounds, the Tacoma can do quite a lot. I decided to put this to the test. From hauling beds full of mulch, to towing boats and jet skis, to the weekend Home Depot or Lowe's run, to hauling a whole slew of motorcycles to the track, events or on adventures, the Tacoma has done it without complaint, without strain, and honestly without even really seeming to notice. I'd like to make special note of the Access Laredo tonneau cover that I purchased with the truck right when I bought it. 15 years on, and it's held up remarkably well, especially considering that most of the truck's life has been spent parked outside in all seasons in New England. The tonneau cover I bought is a soft roll-up cover, however it seals against the weather, it has 3 reinforced struts to keep the cover flat, and it rolls out of the way in a moment so that you can load whatever your next track toy is in the back. The cover has held up remarkably well, and I would be hard-pressed to recommend anything else. It does get the Fred seal of approval. But back to the truck. The Tacoma is the perfect embodiment of everything somebody might need in a truck. Its smaller size means that it's easy to park. The lighter weight versus a full size means average fuel economy over the course of my ownership has been between 21 and 23 miles per gallon. And the power outlet in the back has run everything from hair dryers to air pumps to spotlights to sawzalls. Sure, modern trucks offer more fancy features, but ultimately the utility of the truck is why most people are buying them. Up next is my personal favorite, off-road ability. The very second day I owned the truck, I took it off-road. The day after I bought it, I drove down to Cape Cod and I had it inspected for an oversand beach permit. The Cape Cod National Seashore Park Rangers were at a bit of a loss as to how to register it, since all my paperwork was temporary, my insurance card, my registration, my plates, all of it. And they commented that no one had ever taken a vehicle to the beach with less than 500 miles on the clock, much less on the second day of ownership from new. If you haven't watched my recent video about the Cape Cod oversand beaches, I'll share a link in the description. I do suggest checking it out. It's pretty cool. However, driving in a mostly controlled sandy environment isn't really how most owners envision using their four-wheel drive. How does the truck handle the real stuff? Water over the road, deep snow, a dirt road that turns into a muddy slurry. Well, despite not being branded the off-road version of the Tacoma, I can report that this truck aces everything with capability to spare. As recently as 3 weeks ago, driving back from Cape Cod, there was a microburst that caught us on Route 6 on our way to the Sagamore Bridge. The highway had multiple places where the water covered the road and was up to the axles. Not even a split-second hesitation from the truck. Exploring logging roads in northern Maine, my wife and I got caught in a torrential downpour one time. Suddenly, that solid ground we were on was pretty mushy. The relatively wide tires and the four-wheel drive allowed us to safely navigate back to paved roads without so much as a moment of drama. And then the moment that sticks out the most to me, driving up to Sugarloaf, which is a ski resort up in Maine if you're not familiar, late night during a blizzard. A coworker and I were driving up from Boston and we pulled onto a country road. Snowing hard, wipers cranking, headlights poking into the darkness, it was really coming down. If you're not familiar with northern Maine, a frequent approach to plowing the roads is to do the main roads and then wait it out. Finish the plowing in daylight once the storm ends. So for at least 30 minutes we'd been driving and there was about 6 to 8 inches of unplowed snow on the roads, And though we had to go slowly, the Tacoma had nary concern about the conditions. Now on that back road we found ourselves on, we ended up crossing a town line and immediately found ourselves in a much more serious situation. The road had not been plowed at all since the start of the storm. That 6 to 8 inches of snow was now over 2 feet deep. Thankfully, the snow was light and fluffy, but the view out our windshield had gotten dark as the fog lights in the bumper were now submerged. Truck coming along, I talked through our options with my coworker. We could try to find a place to turn around. However, with the limited lighting, just my truck was out there and there's no streetlights in the countryside of Maine, and the fact that the road was increasingly becoming just a vague suggestion of a clear path between the walls of the forest trees, it was increasingly looking like that wasn't really an option. There was also a concern that if we didn't keep our momentum, the truck might get stuck. So we pressed on, and the truck never faltered. The truck was literally furrowing its way through the snow quite capably. The bumper and the grill were acting as a plow, causing windrows of snow to slide down the doors on either side. Thankfully, within a few miles, we did cross a more traveled road, which was partially cleared, but I'll never forget how solid the truck felt on that drive. When we finally arrived at Sugarloaf, we got out and saw that the wheels were completely filled in with snow, the grill was full of snow, and the fog lights had slowly managed to melt their way through the caked-on snow. The truck is immensely capable off-road. Though I never did any dedicated trails like Moab or the Rubicon, the truck easily handled everything that I encountered over 15 years of ownership. The four-wheel drive system itself is fairly simple, with a 4 high and a 4 low as settings, and other than testing 4 low, I've never found myself needing it in many situations. It always engages and disengages quickly, and I've never had a single issue. There is also a differential lock button, though I never really used it. Time to talk reliability. I mean Toyota. I mean reliability. Wait, aren't those the same thing? Unless you've been living under a rock since 1957, Toyota has been synonymous with reliability. The 2007 Toyota Tacoma embodies this ethos through the 15 years, 186,000 miles, 36 oil changes, 4 sets of tires, and I have never been stranded with it. It's always started, it's always run, and it's always got me where I needed to go. Whether you hop in and are just headed over to the post office, or you hop in and are driving across the country, this truck will get you there. Now, I'm not trying to stir things up, but a good sign of this is the tailgate. Hear me out. Pull the handle. It's a crisp click and it opens. Swing it shut and it's an equally definitive click and it locks into place. Try that with a full-size truck from any of the other popular brands and you'll likely notice a few things. The trim around the handle may be gone. The action, if it even works, will be vague and mushy and indecisive. Or it won't work, or the handle may not even be there. Having watched my dad throughout my childhood with various popular trucks, always running into issues with the tailgate, it speaks to the design and the materials that Toyota uses. This truck has not parked in a garage for the majority of its life. Rain, snow, wind, sun, for years. I've never lubricated, maintained, taken apart, or even thought about that tailgate handle. And it just works. What a great metaphor for this truck, the tailgate. It just works. Now that said, the Tacoma is not without issues. All vehicles over time are going to have problems. One of the main issues for this generation of Tacoma is rust, and quite a bit of it, unfortunately. However, there's a secret. You see, back in the 2010s, Toyota had a recall for serious frame rust on these trucks. There were 2 options. Either Toyota will buy out your truck from you, paying more than the fair market value, or they would pay you to fix it. Well, I was one of the lucky ones who got offered to have it fixed. It snuck up on me. It ended up that I had a fist-sized hole in my frame when I brought it in for service one day, and the dealership wouldn't let me take it home. Fast forward 3 months with a loaner F-150, and I get my truck back. They had disassembled the entire truck, replaced the frame, the fasteners, a number of those underbody components. I told them while they were under there that if they found anything else that needed it, replace those things too. So I also ended up with new shocks and a few other things. A year or 2 later, I did have to replace the steering rack due to corrosion, and last year I did have to replace my air conditioning compressor and my alternator. My Tacoma is essentially a brand new truck underneath, and it has been for the last 5 or 6 years. Now aside from that, I did have a leaf spring develop a crack a few years into ownership. Wasn't expensive to replace at a suspension shop. Over the years, some other things started to go, things which have a lifespan. And of course, a few things you don't plan on replacing. That said, take any other comparable type of vehicle, and I suspect that you'd run into quite a bit more. Here is the entire list of things and all the costs I could find among those that I replaced over 15 years of ownership. That adds up to $9,708 spent over 15 years of ownership, which works out to $650 a year, or about $1.80 per day in maintenance costs. I did save some money early on by not going OEM on certain parts, like the exhaust. Also, I've learned some lessons about not washing it off after it gets lots of salt on it in the winter. I suspect I was on the upper end of the spectrum, and had I stored it inside over a long period of time, the truck would be in even better shape. But again, I've never been stranded and never felt worried about the truck not making it wherever I wanted to go. Alright, so what's weird about this truck? What things did I notice that made me either scratch my head or just seemed a little bit odd? What cool things have I found about it? For a company like Toyota, being weird doesn't really fit their model of being predictable, reliable, and so there aren't that many things. However, I did find a few things of note. First, and easily the most memorable for me, is the roof compass and thermometer right above you when you're driving. Basically, in the ceiling of the truck, there's this little display that shows you the outdoor temperature and the compass heading. That's not so weird. However, what is weird is that there is a rare Toyota miss there. What happens is that every so often, after years of running the truck, that little display stops working. I initially looked into replacing it, but it cost about $600, so I passed. Instead, I decided to investigate. Long story short, it turns out there are two resistors on the circuit board for the display that are under spec for the voltage coming into them. That means they heat up, and after years of use, they get so hot that they desolder themselves, which breaks the connection and shuts off the display. So I soldered them back together, and it was fixed. A year later, though, same thing. So I bought a higher temperature solder. A year after that, the same thing. This ping pong went back and forth a couple times until finally, after the fourth or fifth time, I got tired of dealing with it, and I soldered a wire in place instead of the resistor, and voila, 3 years strong, no issues. Now, in case any armchair experts say that's not safe, the first few months of running it, I kept the tools needed to quickly remove the display right in the center console, and I frequently checked the temperatures. It never even got warm, unlike those old resistors. So, nothing to worry about. A few other things I've noticed. When you set the front windshield defroster on, it automatically turns on the AC without indicating that the AC is on. This makes sense for drying the windshield of fog, but I also liked that it allowed me to stay cool without getting blasted by the other air vents. I ran this way about 95% of the time throughout my ownership. And lastly, the wiper speed icons on my truck are for the duration between swipes of the windshield wipers. On a few loaner Tacomas I had over the years, I noticed that they changed it now to mean how frequently they swipe. This means that on my truck, it's backwards from the newer vehicles. Alright, so how do you best summarize the results of a comprehensive 15-year-long driving test? How do you quantify the things it's enabled you to do? The way that it's been there for you without question for any adventure you want to go on. What I realized is that my Tacoma is like a family member in a lot of ways, there for me during my best memories. In short, I'll say this. The Toyota Tacoma excels at all the reasons you may choose to buy a truck. It can haul stuff, it can tow stuff, it can drive through or over stuff. In 15 years of ownership, I can say that I never wished it was just a little bit bigger. I never found myself wishing for more cargo space or higher capabilities. It never got stuck, and I never needed to be towed. It always starts and has never stranded me. Once it was paid off, it was cheap to own and operate, cheap to insure, cheap to fuel. If you want a truck that can do everything and doesn't need much from you, and you want it to last, there's really just one truck in my mind. The Toyota Tacoma. Perhaps 7 or 8 years after buying my truck, I started to see less of its rivals from the same year on the road. Less Nissans, less Fords, less Chevys. More time passes, and now I don't see any of that same vintage. Yet, perhaps unsurprisingly, I still see lots of Tacomas, just like mine. Incandescent taillights and the big old headlights. Pretty much anywhere I see another Speedway Blue Tacoma, we all wave to each other, acknowledging that there isn't a Tacoma wave like Jeep's, yet we're driving something special enough that it warrants waving to have made it this long. Even today, on a weekly basis, I still see early 2000 Tacomas driving around. That says something, doesn't it? Years ago on the BBC show Top Gear, Jeremy Clarkson and the gang took an old Hilux, which for the rest of the world is the equivalent of the Tacoma, and they beat the heck out of it. They submerged it in the ocean surf, they crushed it, they crashed it, they even demolished a high-rise building with it on top of the roof. And yet, the Hilux still persevered, and it still ran. Like time immemorial, I'm convinced that there will always be some version of the Tacoma from Toyota that, like my 2007, will stand the test of time. Well done, Toyota. Well done. Now in closing, I hear you asking, Fred, why make this review now? 200,000 miles is right around the corner. Well, it was time. Because as of a couple weeks ago, I sold my Tacoma. There were no issues with it and it was running great. I know all the ins and outs of it, and yet it was time. My wife and I are planning some long road trips over the next year where we'll be hauling gear and towing a trailer for thousands of miles far from home. And while the Tacoma has never let me down, my wife reminded me that I more than got my money's worth and could afford to update myself a little bit. So I did. Here's to the next 15 years in my new 22 Tacoma TRD Pro. So thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. And until next time, Fred out!